5 people you must stop trusting after 75. One of them is closer than you think. Arthur Vance, 79 years old. On the morning of March 14th, 2021, I logged into my bank account at 9 o'clock the way I do every morning. I spent 40 seconds reading the balance before my brain accepted it was correct. $47,000 was gone. I had authorized every transfer. I was a bank manager for 31 years. I spent 3 decades warning customers about exactly what had just happened to me. The 5th person on my list, the one I never saw coming, I had known for years. And I still don't know how to tell you this part. On the morning of March 14th, 2021, I logged into my bank account at 9 o'clock, the way I do every morning, and I looked at the balance, and I spent 40 seconds reading the number before my brain accepted that it was correct. 40 seconds. I have thought about those 40 seconds many times since, not because I was slow, because what I was seeing was so far outside what I expected that my mind kept trying to correct it, kept looking for the error in the display, the extra zero that shouldn't be there, the decimal in the wrong place. There was no error. The balance was correct. $47,000 had left my account in 3 transfers, and I had authorized every one of them, and every safeguard I had trusted had been the instrument of the loss. I want to tell you what happened, not for sympathy. I am not interested in sympathy, for prevention. Because I was a bank manager for 31 years, and I spent 3 decades warning customers about exactly what was now happening to me, and I still didn't see it coming. And if I didn't see it, I need you to understand why. I retired in 2012 from the First National Branch on Camelback Road in Phoenix, where I had worked for the last 18 years of my career. Before that, 2 other branches in 2 other states, always the same work, managing money for people who had earned it and needed it protected. I was good at it. I was the person who sat across from elderly customers and walked them through the scams that were circulating, the grandchild in trouble, the lottery prize, the IRS threat. And I was patient with them, and I did not judge them for almost falling for it, because I understood that these things were constructed to work on exactly the instincts that make a person good, the impulse to help, the desire to cooperate, the trust they had built over decades in institutions and authorities. I understood all of that professionally. I had explained it to hundreds of people. I retired with a full pension, a paid-off house, and the specific quiet confidence of a man who had spent his career on the right side of these situations and knew how to stay there. My wife, Barbara, died in 2017. That is relevant, not as sentiment, but as fact. Her death changed my daily structure in ways I did not fully account for. She had been the person who noticed things, who said, "Did you check that?" Who slowed me down when I was moving too fast, who asked the second question when I was satisfied with the first answer. I did not realize how much of my caution had been housed in her until she was gone and the caution started to thin. The seed was a business card. In October of 2020, a man came to my door about roof work. He had been doing work in the neighborhood, he said. I could see a truck down the street, and he had noticed some deterioration around my gutters that might cause problems in the rainy season if I didn't address it. He handed me his card, cream-colored card, embossed lettering, the kind of card that communicates permanence and professionalism and the expectation that it will be kept. I kept it. I put it in my wallet, and I looked up the company online, and the website looked right. And I called 2 days later, and he came out and gave me a quote that was reasonable, and I hired him. I kept that card in my wallet for 6 months. I took it out sometimes and looked at it, the way you look at a thing you have decided to trust. I didn't know then that the business had moved 3 times in 4 years to stay ahead of the complaints, that the website had been up for 8 months, that the embossed card was a prop in a system designed specifically to produce the response I had. I thought I had done my due diligence. I had looked him up, I had called the number, I had checked the box that said verified, and I had hired him, and I had written a check, and I had not called anyone to ask whether what I was doing was right. That was the seed, not stupidity, the assumption that my own verification was sufficient, that because I had taken steps, the steps were enough. That because I was the kind of man who checked, I had checked adequately. My neighbor Gerald Hopper has lived 2 houses down from me since 2015. We are friendly. We wave. We have had conversations over the fence that have lasted 20 minutes. He is a suspicious man. His wife used to apologize for it. His kids describe it as exhausting. And I spent years privately finding it mildly excessive. Gerald verifies everything. He calls his son before signing anything. He never hired anyone who knocked on his door unsolicited. When someone calls him about his bank account, he hangs up and calls the bank directly from the number on his card. He has a separate email address for anything financial. He has been this way his entire adult life, and it has cost him. A contractor who was offended, an advisor who found him tiresome, a few genuine things that went slower than they should have because Gerald wouldn't move without verification. I watched this for years and thought, Gerald doesn't trust anyone. I meant it as a mild criticism. I had better judgment than Gerald. I was a bank manager. I knew what to look for. In the spring of 2022, Gerald helped me go through my records and figure out exactly how everything had happened. He didn't say anything when we finished. He just closed the folder and put his hand on my arm for a moment. He has his savings, he has his house, he has his independence. I would give almost anything to have spent the last 10 years being as exhausting as Gerald. I am going to tell you 5 kinds of people to stop trusting automatically after 75. Not strangers. You already know about strangers. The people I'm describing are the ones you've decided are safe. The ones you've already let inside the perimeter. The ones you think you've already assessed. The first is the person who comes to your door with something you didn't know you needed. The contractor, the roofer, the man who notices your gutters, your driveway, your exterior. He is not random. He has driven the neighborhood and identified the houses where the maintenance might be deferred, where the owner appears to be living alone, where a modest deterioration might be a convincing opening. The fact, he came to my door in October. I hired him in November. He did work. I want to be clear about this, because this is part of what makes it work. He did real work, inadequately, and at twice the fair rate, and he left a card with a name I could call if I had concerns. What he also did was establish himself as someone I had dealt with, someone I had a card for, someone whose name was in my phone. That relationship became the credential he used 3 months later when he called back about additional work, and the call from someone I had already paid felt like a continuation of a transaction rather than the beginning of a new one. The interior. I did not think I was being naive. I thought I was being a reasonable person who had already done the work of vetting this man and was now simply doing more business with a known quantity. The vetting I had done was the website and the card. The known quantity was a fiction I had been sold. The detail I cannot shake. The sound of his truck pulling away after the first job. Diesel engine, heavy, purposeful. The sound of competence. Of a man with equipment who had done work and been paid and was leaving. It sounded exactly like what it was supposed to sound like. The second is the investment advisor who finds you at the right moment. Barbara's death had left me with some decisions to make about how our assets were structured. I was not in crisis. The finances were sound, but there were things to reorganize, and I needed help with them. A man named Garrett contacted me 8 months after she died, referred by someone I knew from the bank, who I later found out had received a finder's fee for the referral. Garrett was careful. He was not aggressive. He took 3 meetings before he proposed anything. He listened well. He asked about my goals and my risk tolerance and my timeline, and he used all the right language in all the right ways because he had been trained to do exactly that. What he proposed was not obviously fraudulent. That is the important thing to understand. It was not obviously anything. It was complex enough that following it required trusting his interpretation, and I trusted his interpretation. And $22,000 of what I had worked for all my life went somewhere I have never been able to fully trace. The invisible cost, the one that was harder than the money, was the discovery that 31 years of professional financial experience had not protected me. I had managed other people's money for 3 decades, and I had not been able to manage my own when the circumstances were right. The confidence I had built in my own judgment was one of the things Garrett had specifically used against me. The more certain you are that you know what to look for, the less carefully you look. The third is the voice on the phone that knows your name. In January of 2021, I received a call from a man who identified himself as being from my bank's fraud department. He knew my name. He knew the last 4 digits of my account. He told me there had been suspicious activity and he needed to verify my identity before we could discuss it. I answered the security questions. All of them. I answered them calmly and correctly, thinking, this is exactly how this process is supposed to work. He thanked me. He told me the matter would be resolved within 24 hours. He asked me not to attempt to log in during that period, as it might interfere with the security protocols. I said thank you and hung up and went to make coffee. That call was the authorization for everything that followed. The information I provided was the key. The instruction not to log in was the window, and I gave all of it freely, correctly, to a man I had no way to verify was who he said he was, because he knew things that made him sound real, and he asked questions in the order that questions are supposed to be asked, and the whole thing sounded exactly like what it was pretending to be. The fourth is the helpful new acquaintance who appears at the right time. After Barbara died, I had a period of isolation that I now understand was the target. A man named Dennis began appearing at things I attended, a community meeting, a homeowners association event, the kind of low-stakes public gathering that becomes important when you are recently widowed and the social calendar has thinned. He was pleasant. He was helpful. He knew people I knew. He became, over about 6 months, someone I considered a friend. Dennis introduced me to Garrett. Dennis mentioned the roofing contractor as someone his sister had used. Dennis was, I now understand, a node in a network designed to produce exactly the trust I extended. I do not know if he was paid or if he simply found people for others as a favor and received favors in return. What I know is that every introduction Dennis made led somewhere that cost me something, and I did not see the pattern until I drew the map. The fifth is the one closer than you think. In the spring of 2022, my son David came to Phoenix to help me go through my finances. He is a good man. He loves me. What I found, going through the records with him, was that he had been making small decisions on my behalf without asking, redirecting some automatic payments, changing a service I used, moving some documents to his email for safekeeping. None of it malicious. All of it done from a genuine desire to help and protect. None of it done with my knowledge or consent. The fact, he showed me what he had done, transparently, assuming I would be grateful. I was not angry. I sat at my kitchen table and I looked at the records, and I understood something that took me a while to be able to say. Protection and control look identical from the inside. A person can love you completely, can be acting entirely in your interest, and can still be making decisions that belong to you. The detail I cannot shake. The kitchen table that morning, coffee going cold, David's face, which was earnest and concerned and slightly confused by my silence, the folder of documents between us, the specific quality of realizing that the person I trusted most had been operating in my financial life in ways I hadn't known, and that his motives were pure, and that pure motives do not make an action less consequential. The people who can hurt you most after 75 are sometimes the people who love you most, not because they mean to, because love does not make anyone immune to error, to presumption, to the slow drift from helping to deciding, and because when we trust someone completely, we often stop watching. And unwatched love, like unwatched anything, can go places we didn't intend. Gerald, by contrast, had made his son sign an agreement years ago, a written agreement, about what decisions Gerald's son could make and which ones required Gerald's explicit approval. His son had been annoyed by it. Gerald had not cared. He said, "I love you and I trust you, and this is how we stay that way." I thought that was excessive. I want to say one thing before I say anything else, because I know what happens when you tell a story like this. People assume you are telling them you were stupid, and I am not telling you that. I managed money for 31 years. I was careful. I was informed. I had professional knowledge of exactly the mechanisms that were used against me, and I had warned hundreds of people about them with genuine competence. None of that protected me. What left me vulnerable was not ignorance. It was loss, and the specific ways that loss changes the conditions under which you think. When Barbara was alive, my caution was doubled by hers. When she died, I was managing everything alone, in a state of grief that I was functioning through rather than processing. And functioning through grief means doing things that look normal while the underlying system is damaged. I thought I was fine. I thought I had recovered. I had not. I had compensated, which is different, and the compensation had gaps I couldn't see from the inside. The people who exploit older adults after loss are not relying on stupidity. They are relying on the very specific vulnerability of a person who is managing alone for the first time in decades, whose social verification system has been removed, and whose confidence in their own judgment is intact even when the judgment isn't. That is the truth. You are not safe because you are smart. You are not safe because you have professional experience. You are not safe because you have been careful your whole life. You are safe when you have systems and structures and other people in the loop, and when you are honest with yourself about the conditions under which those systems might fail. You are probably doing something right now that I was doing. You have a person in your life, A child, a sibling, a close friend who helps you with things, who you have given some level of access to some part of your financial or logistical life because it was easier and because you trust them completely. And you have not had a direct conversation with that person about exactly what they are and are not authorized to do on your behalf. Not because you're negligent, because the conversation feels unnecessary with someone you trust completely. That conversation is the one I am asking you to have today, not to protect yourself from the person, to protect both of you from the drift that happens when trust is assumed rather than structured. My son and I had that conversation in the spring of 2022, and it was uncomfortable, and it was the most useful thing that came out of the worst 2 years of my financial life. Write down on a piece of paper what decisions in your financial life you want someone else to be able to make. And then write down what decisions you want to keep. And then give both lists to the person you trust and ask them to honor the line. Not because you don't trust them, because trust is not a substitute for clarity, and love is not a substitute for structure. And the people who care about you the most deserve to know exactly where the boundary is so they don't accidentally cross it. And call your bank this week, not if something goes wrong, this week, and ask them what verbal verification protections are on your account. Ask them what would happen if someone called claiming to be you. Ask them how you would know the difference between their fraud department and someone pretending to be their fraud department. Write down what they tell you. Keep it somewhere you can find it. Tell me in the comments, is there someone in your life who has access to some part of your finances that you've never had a direct conversation with about the limits of that access? Because that conversation is not distrust. I know exactly what it is. It is the thing that might have saved me $47,000 and 2 years of my life.